You know, it's good to pay very close attention to terms that transcend particular fields of study or particular domains of epistemology or general discourse, and see why these terms, these pervasive terms, have such linguistic power to describe and form our structure of the world. And perhaps very few terms cut as deep as the word symmetry. You know, symmetry is a concept we all understand from our daily lives. We usually use it as an aesthetic evaluation. Things that are symmetrical tend to be balanced, they tend to be well proportioned. We know, for example, that it's been, demonstrated that people with symmetrical faces tend to be considered more attractive. Symmetry obviously is a very deep instinctual desire for the experience of symmetry on many levels is something that's obviously very deep in our person, and that has evolved with our both animal and human nature. And symmetry, in its aesthetic terms, shows how the aesthetics of symmetry are cut very deep towards our ability to analyze anything at all, our ability to evaluate the quality of anything at all. Symmetry is this meta framework through which all evaluations ultimately have to kind of go through the rigor of being evaluated in terms of its symmetrical beauty in some way. Symmetry is definitely a part of what makes anything beautiful that's beautiful, and what makes anything good that's good. Okay? Now, also symmetry has been used in a much more technical term by science. Physicists have been searching for supersymmetry with certain elementary particles now for years to validate string theory. Now, they haven't been able to find it, but what's interesting is that they all claim that it should be there. And what are they looking for? They're looking for a complementary balance that they don't see. There's an expected aesthetic balance in their equations that should be there that's not there. And it troubles them. Now, I don't want to get into whether or not I concur with string theory or whether I think they're just wasting their time, but nonetheless, it's the impulse towards symmetry here that is propelling them to keep looking and looking and looking, because they just feel like it should be there, and that's ultimately an aesthetic evaluation. Now, perhaps symmetry is the most important idea behind understanding what the different mechanisms do in the integrated information theory in terms of the single elements within one mechanism. Let me explain. We've determined that a causal system is whole if the behavior of the whole system cannot be reduced to the behavior of its parts. The behavior of its parts, the individual mechanisms, are tied together in such a way through logic gates that the behavior of the whole is unitary. Now, every single mechanism in that structure acts like a symmetry break. It literally splits a symmetry. It's a yes or no question that splits a geometric symmetry in quality, in information space, and of the quality of shape that's eventually going to actualize, as it's splitting the symmetry and ruling out all the possible whole system states that it could be in. It's all splitting symmetries. So experience itself is a splitting of conceptual symmetries. Now, if you just step back, I mean, that's what science is saying. Now, if you just step back from that and have a kind of poetic sensibility towards that statement, consciousness is the splitting of conceptual symmetries. It also implies a perfectly symmetrical beginning through which symmetries are broken. God, because he is perfect not just ontologically and not just geometrically, but also aesthetically, is obviously perfectly symmetric. God's symmetry demonstrates how we can start to understand the fact that within God, His own perfection it's not just good luck that He happens to be both perfectly good, perfectly beautiful, perfectly geometrically, organized. No. It's that once you start to understand why that is, because of His very nature, because experiences themselves and being itself is ultimately geometric, then you start to see how symmetry is a fundamental concept to the goodness of God, the reality of God, and the perfection of God. And why symmetry then exudes an aesthetic compulsion from anyone who wants to have any kind of aesthetic evaluation of reality at all. And when I say that, I mean even like looking at a painting. Symmetry. I'm not saying everything has to be perfectly symmetrical, but insofar as anything breaks symmetries, it's a deliberate breaking, because the symmetry is the kind of the default perfection of things, and it implies a sidedness to things. And within God is the one that is the perfect symmetrical reflection of itself. I mean, that's where we come back to the idea of reflections here, and reflections and symmetry go hand in hand. Because God is one, but He's a reflection, a symmetrical reflection of His own form, which is ultimately geometric. Once you start to articulate the reality of God in geometric terms, and then start to think about the aesthetic concepts of symmetry for one, and maybe most importantly, what starts to become clear is the reality of the situation, and the reality of God as something we can start to consider in ways that aren't just metaphors, or not metaphors in the normal way we think of metaphors. Look at symmetry in your own life. Look at the way you evaluate art. Look at the way that symmetry puts together the world on many levels. And it can only enrich your experience of reality and ultimately of God.